Hello, we're going to talk about Chapter 8, Building a Republic today. And here we go. What you will learn from this lecture, number one, we're going to learn about what type of government the Articles of Confederation created. The Articles of Confederation were the first government that was set up after the American Revolution. The second thing is, how did the states define freedom and citizenship? Because each state had a part in playing what type of government the United States was going to have. We'll also look at why the Articles of Confederation failed. And we'll also look at what type of government did our founders put into place. And that, of course, is the Constitution. And the Constitution, we will spend some time looking at the provisions of the Constitution. Let's look at the Articles of Confederation. So, a couple of things here. It says Congress, Confederation, and the problem of Western lands. And basically, there's a number of things here that I'm going to talk about briefly. And what everybody seemed to agree on after the American Revolution is that we wanted a government that could do certain things but not do other things. They were very scared of having an ultra powerful government that would do too much. And so they wanted to have a government that could do these four things really well. First of all, pursuing war and peace. They wanted a government that could, at least at the very basic level, give everyone a sense of security, being that we had just fought a revolution with Great Britain, and to create a new nation where everyone feels as though the nation is protected. So having a defense force, a military to pursue war, to keep the peace, that sort of thing. Another basic function of the government is to conduct foreign relations and to make agreements with other countries. That seemed to be another thing that everybody agreed on. You must remember that these 13 colonies, which are now the United States, are very, very different. They don't agree on everything, and we still don't agree on everything in this country. And so wide agreement was seen as something that was very important. The government also needed to do these two things at the bottom, which is regulate trade and run a postal service. Very important for those two things to have happen as well. So again, pursuing war and peace, conducting foreign relations, regulating trade, and running a postal service. Running the new government was very difficult in some cases because the 13 colonies often did not come together very well in order to reach consensus on decisions, and many of the times they didn't even have a quorum necessary to do business. A quorum is necessary people that are supposed to be there. You know, if you have 13 colonies, quorum is like half plus one, and often representatives didn't meet together or couldn't make it to the meetings or whatever it might be, and so they couldn't actually do much. There were executive departments of war to conduct the business of defending the country. There was an executive department of finance to look at the situation of the money, of the banking system, of that sort of thing. One of the big problems after the Revolutionary War is the tremendous cost of the Revolutionary War, and that became a bigger issue later on, especially during this time of the Articles of Confederation. And also just another office here of Foreign Affairs. So what's interesting about this is that the Articles of Confederation set up these basic government structures that were going to be used in the Constitution a little bit later. Articles of Confederation did not have a chief executive power. Did not have, in other words, a president did not exist. Because of the experience with King George, they didn't want to have a super powerful king or king type figure as part of the government. The states. How did the states define freedom and citizenship? Well, first of all, the states were all different, but generally had similar characteristics. And the importance of this is that as the states develop their own governments, many of those ideas will be incorporated into the future in the Constitution. Let me come back to congressional recommendation in just a second, but republicanism, the idea of having a representative government, which was very important. Also, the issue of representation. There was agreement with the idea that republics could succeed only in relatively small units. Most states included 2 house assemblies, with some of the lower houses gaining more power. And so it just depended on the state. Some states had 2 houses of representation, some had one house of representation. The Bill of Rights. 6 of the state constitution included Bill of Rights. These are lists of basic liberties that government should not change, including specific rights to freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, those sorts of things. Now, let me come back to number 1 right here. Right after and during the Revolutionary War, it was very important that the Continental Congress told the states to draw up their own constitution based on the authority of the people. Okay? And what that did is basically, once the revolution was complete, then there could be governments in place that each state could have. And by the end of the Revolutionary War, all of the states had done that. States define people in their own ways. First of all, there were limits to full political participation. Certain limits were widely agreed upon, and one of the most defining limits was property. Okay, in nearly every state, voters and political candidates had to meet varying property qualifications. So basically, you had to have land in order to be able to vote or to even be elected into office. The disfranchised. The people that could not vote probably was about 1/4 to 1/2 of the adult white males in the states. Remember, women cannot vote, slaves cannot vote, or even free blacks or Native Americans. And so adult white males were the only ones that could vote, but only with property. Again, to restate, women and African Americans and Native Americans were certainly not included in the state's definition of the people, nor would they be when the government actually writes the Constitution. Equality and slavery. Now, civil rights and liberties applied to all people, okay, except slaves, of course. Now it says property owners and property-less folks. The whole idea was that civil rights and civil liberties and freedoms were supposed to apply to everybody. Now, of course, voting and political participation did not apply to everybody, so that's one thing to remember. Slavery became less important and gradually became eradicated in the northern and middle states between 1780 and 1804. And that is a huge reason why slavery did not exist in the North. and the middle colonies, and why it persisted in the South. Our third question is, why did the Articles of Confederation fail? So now we're making a transition from some of the features of government and some of the basic features of the Articles of Confederation. So you have this government structure that's supposed to work in theory, but there are some definite issues. One of the biggest problems that any government faces is financial chaos. And one of the things that happens in the Articles of Confederation is that there is now a tremendous national debt, because now the individual states, in order to pay for the Revolutionary War, had run up tremendous debt, financed by printing paper money and borrowing from private sources. The serious post-war depression settled in by the mid-1780s and did not lift until the 1790s. So really the states found themselves, and the country found itself, in a tremendous financial pickle, because they couldn't actually pay for the large debt that they had incurred during the Revolutionary War. So along comes this guy named Robert Morris, who's a Philadelphia merchant, to be the superintendent of finance. And he was the superintendent of finance from 1781 to 1784, and he was charged with taking control of these economic problems to think up a solution. And the thing that he thought up is called the Morris Plan. And basically, in order to pay for the debt, he said, let's put a 5% import tax on stuff that's coming into the country. Congress didn't like it. They needed a unanimous agreement on an amendment like that. And so that failed. His next idea was to create an actual bank in North America called the Bank of North America, which would basically hold the government's hard money, such as gold and silver coins, as well as private deposits, and provide it with short-term loans. And so that was an important part of the plan. It was successful in some ways. However, there were other problems. This failed because Congress, again, did not tax trade. Congress was basically unable to control the out-of-control inflation. They couldn't stop the flow of state-issued paper money or even pay the mounting public debt. And so what you had was states struggling to cover the cost of the war debt that they had incurred. And then the problem is that money is being printed up, and when money is printed up, you get inflation and the devaluing of currency. So all of this is one big factor why the Articles of Confederation failed. And again, just to restate, to print money, the states are printing up money like crazy. Paying down the debt is going to be difficult, and there is no power to tax at all. Now, out of all of these problems, you got to look at this one, the power to tax. Congress has no power to tax. Now take a look at this graph. It says prices skyrocketed as Congress and the state governments printed huge amounts of paper money to cover the costs of the war. And when you print money, this is what happens. The prices of everything just skyrocket. And this is when, during the Revolutionary War, that's understandable. But after the Revolutionary War, this is just a huge mess. And also, the British are blocking the supply of goods into the country. And so this is the worst inflation we've ever seen in the history of the United States. Other weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. You had a one-house Congress, and you needed at least 9 of 13 states to vote to pass a law. You needed all of them to amend it, which meant everybody had to agree, which is pretty much impossible. Representatives were frequently absent. I can't make it to the meeting. And Congress simply could not tax or raise armies. Okay, so that does it for the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and the state government structures. In the next lecture, we will continue along with what gave us the Constitution and the problems of the Articles of Confederation.